the way we design our roundabouts has not been that great for people walking and biking. And there is another way. And I think that I'd love to see more cities embracing Dutch style geometry and approaches to roundabout design so that we can try to bring it back as a tool that's not just good for safety for people driving, but good for the safety and access of everybody. And so I think this is a room for growth we have here in the States, is to rethink our roundabouts, in particular in more compact designs for urban areas. So I'd love to see some of these also emerge here in this sort of the next 10 years of the building of our safe, connected bike systems here in the States.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Active Towns channel. My name is John Simmerman, and that is Nick Falbo from Portland, Oregon, and the Dutch transportation design firm Mobycon. We're going to be winding back the clock a bit and taking a look at some of the early days of protected bike lanes, protected intersections, and some of the graphics work that he did in creating some videos explaining about Dutch-inspired protected intersections. But before we get to that, I just want to say, if you are enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Super easy to do. Just hit the join button right here in YouTube down below, or become an Active Towns ambassador via Patreon, buy me a coffee, or making contributions to the nonprofit. Super easy to do. Just navigate over to activetowns.org, click on the support tab at the top of the page. Okay, let's get right to it with Nick. Falbo, thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Nick, I love giving my guests an opportunity to introduce themselves. So who the heck is Nick Falbo?
I am a transportation planner and designer. Sometimes I call myself a plan engineer. I'm not an engineer, but I like to think about kind of how that all fits together. And I do my best to be able to hold my own in conversations with engineers. I work for a planning firm called Mobycon. It's a Dutch-American planning firm that has been doing work here in the US for over a decade. And I come to this firm from a background in public sector planning here in Portland, Oregon, other private sector planning with Alta Planning and Design, where I started my career. And yeah, I've been super excited about the work I've got to do over the course of my career, and the work I'm doing today, back in the private sector, getting to work in cities all across the country. I have a real strong passion for street design, and I've seen what the best can look like. And I know that we can do better and we can build the best here in the US. So I'm excited to get to be a part of that effort to bring high quality, wonderful streetscapes and places here into America.
Fantastic. That's great. That's great. What was the origin story in terms of what got you interested in doing this type of work?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was living in Portland got me interested in doing planning. Portland's kind of been known as a place where they maybe punch above their weight when it comes to planning, land use planning, transportation planning. We're not a very big city, but we have a lot going for us for when it comes to how you can get around and how you can live your life. So it was really living in Portland in the early 2000s that got me noticing that this city was built differently, and got me realizing that there was a whole industry dedicated to making changes to the world that we live in. And I think a lot of people kind of have those realizations. They come to planning with a background in something completely different, and then realize that there's a whole world out there that they can get involved in to kind of make their city, their place, their community better. And so I definitely had one of those types of realizations where I was working a whole completely different job here in Portland, and I just noticed that this city was different from every other city. I was like, why can I ride my bike to work here in Portland, but I couldn't do that in Boston? I couldn't do that in Cleveland, some of these other cities I'd been visiting. And what made that different? And it was planning, it was design, and it was transportation.
Yeah. And the rest is history. It's good stuff. Well, you mentioned Mobycon. So yes, you made the switch over to Mobycon. It's been about a year and a half, hasn't it?
It's been about a year and a half since I came to Mobycon. And it's been great. Mobycon's a small company. We're a Dutch American firm. There's a headquarters in Ottawa, Canada, here in North America, where we've got a great team of people working. I work with them every day. And then here in the US, we're very small. It's myself and my colleague Jamie Arnau, who works here in Portland with me. So we have a tiny little crew here in Portland where we serve the whole US, of course, in close collaboration with our team in Canada and our team in the Netherlands. So we kind of try to be everywhere all at once, and it's been great. We've got to work with some great clients all around the country, and we're always looking for those cities that want to build better and do some incredible work and kind of innovate in a field that is constantly changing.
Yeah, yeah. And I've lost count. I've interviewed so many people from Mobycon. It's been pretty funny. I've had the opportunity to have a few people on the channel in the podcast, but then also I've been able to meet up in person with other members of the team, including Leonard. Now Leonard just moved to New Zealand, and so he's heading up what they're calling the Pacific office. I was joking with him, and because I used to live in Hawaii, and I was like, hey, you're just a hop over to Hawaii. If you're going to call yourself the Pacific Division, there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Honolulu's doing some great work in street design and bikes and transit. So maybe there's some opportunity there. But yeah, it's actually been so great. This sort of global offices lets us work, kind of in almost a 24-hour cycle at this point, where we can hand work off to each other, we can coordinate. It's actually easier for me to talk to Leonard in New Zealand than it is when he was in the Netherlands, in fact, here on the West Coast. So it takes some getting used to, but I've worked in these sort of remote environments for a while and more in the past. And so it takes some getting used to, but I enjoy it. I enjoy getting to connect with people at all times of day and all across the globe.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things that is exciting about Mobycon as an entity, as a firm, helping out in these remote locations, international locations, is bringing that concept of Dutch design to a market, an area that may just not understand, that nuance. And you have a long history in doing that. We're going to talk a little bit about design and go through some images that you supplied for us. And I mentioned before we hit the record button that I can remember some of your work that you did, I don't know, a decade ago. It's been a long time, and time is a weird thing, especially with pandemics and all this other stuff that's going on, and that warps our time. But yeah, I can remember some of the early stuff that you were doing, and we'll kind of look at that a little bit, and especially like the Dutch design, protected intersections, protected bike infrastructure, that sort of stuff. Why don't you kind of close the gap a little bit? You shared a little bit about your origin story within this type of work in relationship to Portland, but that doesn't necessarily explain your fascination with Dutch design, which really is what caught my attention with the work that you were doing and the content that you were creating, because you were a content creator back then too. What was that kernel of interest that was the Dutch design?
Yeah, and I think some of the materials that we'll flip through, you'll get to kind of see a little of that story unfold of kind of what prompted a little bit of a deeper dive into the Dutch practices, and in general, it's sort of this interesting question. I think 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you could come in from the Netherlands and say, hey, we're from the Netherlands, we're here to help. We know what we're doing and how to do this work. And everyone was like, yes, that's great. Tell us what to do. Today, in 2025, we're in a whole different world. New guidelines are out that are adopted by FHWA, by NACTO. And for the most part, the Americans kind of have it figured out. And it's been this journey over the last 15 years that has gotten them there. And so I'm always like trying to think, okay, what's left? What's next? What are those next innovations happening in the Netherlands that we need to be thinking about, we need to be adopting? But as far as the work back back in 2014, which is when I released my protected intersection video, and in 2010, 2011, the early days of the NACTO Bikeway Design Guide, it was really about, recognizing that we had a lot of catching up to do, that we had in the US been kind of frozen in time from some ideas from the 70s that really held us back when it came to what it meant to serve people, in particular bicycling for transportation. And so it was recognizing that kind of like this hump we had to come over, and recognizing that we can learn so much from those cities and those places around the world that are doing far better in their outcomes. And what does it take for them to get there in terms of the way they're providing for people biking. And so it was that kind of work. One of my first projects in this industry as an intern was to work on the NACTO Urban Bikeway Design Guide. Well, incredible project to get to work on as I was starting my career. And that was really a deep dive into what was happening internationally. And interestingly enough, they didn't lean very Dutch in the NACTO Bike Guide, which was a little bit of a criticism. And it was following that thread to understand, what do the Dutch do differently? How do they approach things differently? That made me kind of more deeply understand what they were doing. That it was kind of like the ideas I needed to get out there. What did I need to help share to keep furthering the practice here in bikeway design in the US?
Yeah. And I had recently I had Bill Schulteis on to talk about the new AASHTO Bicycle Facilities Design Guide, and then had Ryan Russo on from NACTO to talk about the new NACTO Bikeway Design Guide that NACTO had put out. And it was fun going back and rewinding and sort of looking at that era of the 2012, 2013 bike design guides that came out from both NACTO and from AASHTO, and some missed opportunities there. And so I appreciate what you're saying of that. They didn't really kind of lean heavily into the Dutch design necessarily, and it was unfortunate for both of the design guides. But the NACTO one was still far and above better than the 2012 AASHTO Bikeway Design Guide, which Bill and I chatted about, and he was very bummed that didn't materialize a little bit differently. But what was really interesting too about rewinding and thinking about what our influences were back in that era is, like, we had the People for Bikes Green Lane project, and so we were just starting to come to grips and understand the after effects of vehicular cycling and that impact that really had on our bikeway design guides. And, at the time it was, just even having green paint down was like, earth shattering. It was like cutting edge. And so we have really come a long ways when you start to look at having protected and separated facilities that start to look and feel a little bit like the Dutch concept in terms of their protected and separated infrastructure. But one of the things that I always emphasize too here on the channel is that a lot of their network is shared space. And it's really traffic calming, and it's street designs that reinforce slower speeds. And that's what we see in their, shared space environments, whether it's their fietsstraats or their local access roads that are just paved in bricks, then send a message to drivers to slow down. And that brings us to your very first image, is how street design can reinforce slower speeds. So walk us through what we're looking at here.
Oh, yeah. I think when preparing for our conversation today, I kept thinking about how really the story of innovation in this industry, in this field, and how I think transportation gets kind of this reputation as being stuck by its design manuals, the MUTCD, the FHWA, these organizations that are keeping us back from innovating. And maybe there's a little bit of truth to that. Obviously, we do exist in a world where we are following standards and rules and regulations. But I would like to argue that transportation has always been highly innovative. And, it's hard to kind of put ourselves back 100 years, but this is an image here from Oregon on the Columbia River Gorge Highway, where the very first yellow center line was used here in the United States in 1917. So this was like, these are just as an example of where transportation innovation has always been happening from the very beginning days. When roads were first built, they didn't even have center lines at all. And then they started playing with markings and they started playing with colors. I think the original center line experiment was in a different state, like 1911. They added color to make it yellow. It wasn't formalized in any sort of design guidelines until the 1930s. And it didn't really, even the conventions of dashed lines and solid lines didn't start to get formalized until in the 50s. So this level of ideas, experimentation, trial, learning, sharing, this has been a part of this industry since the very beginning. And I think that, as we see the transformation that has happened over the past 15 years, in particular, I think bikeway design has really been where we've done so much. It is maybe heartening to know that as hard as it feels sometimes, there is a pathway forward, and we have been putting that into practice. So I think we've been able to see how we go from ideas to practice to sort of trial and experimentation to formal adoption. And we've been able to see that happen over the last 15 years. So we'll kind of flip through a few things where you can see that story unfold bit by bit over the years.
Yeah. And before we do that, I just want to comment too that these two images, the top image, of course, is from 1917 and is like the historical context of this road, and then a more modern snapshot below. And one of the things that comes to mind when we see this from a street design perspective is that our first gut reaction is like, oh my gosh, this looks like a dangerous road. It's a rural environment. It's a mountainous environment. No, these are not from the Netherlands, folks. And so that inclination of, oh my gosh, this must be really, really dangerous. But the counterintuitiveness of a street like this, a road like this, a rural road like this, is it reinforces better driver behavior and slower speed and more attentiveness. And so the sort of the irony is that a street like this is actually a safer street than one that has forgiving design that encourages faster speed and less attentiveness. And so it reminds me of a chapter in Tom Vanderbilt's book Traffic, where he describes a similar type of mountainous road in Spain where it was like white knuckle, it's like one wrong move and you can plummet off, versus the earlier the previous day he got off the plane and he was jet lagged and he nearly fell asleep while driving on this massive motorway that had multiple lanes and forgiving design, and it just doesn't demand your attention. And so I always, when I see streets in images like this, it reminds me of that lesson of the counterintuitiveness of a road that is quote unquote looks and feels a little bit more dangerous because there's a cliff right there or whatever, and there's lots of curves. Like even the lower image here, if we turned it over to unlimited budgets and transportation engineers, they'd probably straighten out all those curves and have more forgiving design. So I love that you included this. Yeah.
Could you imagine building this street today? They would never be able to build it like this. You're absolutely right. It's the lanes are too narrow and the sight lines are compromised, but it is actually part of what gives this whole corridor its character, its beauty, and its environment.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right. And now we're going to take a look at some history.
Yeah. So, in the vein of like, how do we innovate in this industry? We've been doing it. We've been trying. And there was an era in sort of the late 60s and early 70s where we were enthusiastic about experimenting and supporting bicycling for transportation. And so, down in California, in the kind of Davis, California area, there was a lot of experimentation, research, and trial happening. And this is a study from 1972 from UC Davis, where they were experimenting with protected bike lanes back in those late 60s and early 70s. And so it really just sort of, you look at those photos and like, that looks almost like what we build today. Like
Yeah.
you've
And what's
got the
funny
curb
is
stops, you've got the parking.
exactly curb stops. You got parking protected bike lane, 1972.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah, wild, right? So we were doing this in this era, and this study, if you dig into it, just like we do today, we'll trial things out. We do some understanding of what are our objectives. We study the outcomes, and we make decisions. They did run into some challenges. They did note challenges with visibility at driveways and intersections, concerns about people just sort of popping out behind parked cars, concerns about right hooked risk. These are all the same concerns that continue to be raised when we talk about protected bike lanes today, and certainly did when we sort of reset our efforts to get protected bike lanes into the industry back in 2010 with the NACTO bike guide. And so this is just like a little bit of a reminder of the path these can take can be kind of circuitous. But unfortunately, just 4 years later, John Forrester released his book, Effective Cycling, which really captured the imaginations of at least the engineers that were trying to design our streets. And in light of the challenges that they faced in these early studies, and this maybe easy out in the form of effective cycling, these ideas kind of got forgotten and fell to the wayside for the next 30 years.
Yeah, yeah. And for those who are unfamiliar with who John Forrester is and the book Effective Cycling, he's really the godfather of vehicular cycling. And yeah, so they really were vocal in advocating against putting in those types of facilities. Yeah. And then along comes the Portland blue bike lanes.
Back to Portland. This is sort of the era I moved to Portland in. So this is where I got inspired to do this kind of work, was living in Portland, where at the time we had blue bike lanes on the ground, and which was really unique. I don't know if any other cities were really doing much experimentation with color at the time. Portland had been hot off the heels of their 1996 bike plan from sort of led by Mia Burke in the Portland Bureau of Transportation, and they were embracing bicycling in a big way in the 90s. They had been building out bike boulevards in their neighborhoods. You were mentioning kind of slow streets being an important part of the network here in Portland. They are the majority of our network, and it works really well for our context. But they were also experimenting with bike lanes and how do we make them better and safer. So kind of countering the John Forrester narrative that these bike lanes and separated spaces aren't safe and promote conflict. We said, well, you know what? They are safe, they are comfortable, but what can we do to enhance them so that they can be safer, more visible, more noticeable? And so they're experimenting with blue bike lanes, inspired by the Danish and their use of blue in their bike lanes. So they done similarly. They were putting some examples on the ground, studying their effectiveness, found that color did seem to increase awareness of the bike lane, did seem to increase the opportunity for drivers to notice and yield to bicyclists. And so this is all, that next little bit of evidence that says, yes, let's keep doing this. Let's do more of this, and let's apply it in the right places. So this was this sort of context where I was riding around, I was seeing these blue bike lanes, and I was seeing a place that was through investment, through innovation, doing something different. And I was appreciating it as a resident, and I was realizing that, there's a whole world to this of understanding and innovation. And it was really very inspiring to me at the time, and got me thinking about urban planning and transportation design as a career here. It was a very formative time for me, just being here in the city. And I didn't mention too much in my background, but when I moved to Portland, I moved up from Eugene, to the big city here in Oregon, with an art degree. So I have a degree in fine art, and I studied animation and filmmaking. And so I was working in Portland as an animator.
That comes through later.
That comes through later. Yeah, so I was working in Portland as an animator and doing video games and graphics and animation, but like realizing that I wanted to do something different. I wanted to, I was building these kind of fake worlds, and I was realizing that there's more in the real world that I maybe want to put my mark on.
What's interesting too about this image, and we'll describe it here for the listening only audience, is that we have this blue bike lane painted across the conflict area, and this looks like it's a permissive slip lane, like right turn lane. And so In the background, it looks like we've got a bus and a couple of other cars. It looks like a very high-speed environment. It just makes me shudder to think that, oh my gosh, this was even something so important and innovative that we put it on the cover of something. And then now in today's era, we'd look at that and say, don't do that, please.
Yeah,
we don't want to kill people.
This particular location has gone through multiple iterations of changes over the years, and it still is not perfect. So there's more to do. I can test that, but this is one of our more major bikeway entrances into the city. And so, yeah, they were prioritizing how do we make this feel more comfortable in what is kind of a stressful condition.
Yeah. And part of the history, too, people might be going, blue. Yeah. Copenhagen, they use blue. Later on, though, in the United States, blue got adopted as, like, I think medical and hospital zone.
Yeah, like accessible ADA parking and
exactly. So blue sort of got tagged for that. That's where we're in our quote unquote design guides and whatever. They're calling that blue. In the United States, green, we mentioned earlier the People for Bikes Green Lane project. So this almost like Kermit color green has been the color that has been adopted and used widely in these conflict zone areas. And then, of course, the Dutch use the terracotta colored red in theirs, which is a natural pigment, which ended up being a very cheap and accessible natural pigment color that they used in the early stages of some of their bikeway development that took place back in the day, about 50 years ago. And we're actually using the terracotta pigment color in Austin, and we'll see some of those in a little bit. We actually add them to concrete slurry when we're doing concrete work, and we want to separate the pedestrians from the people on bikes, but our local folks have not figured out how to add that pigment to the asphalt yet. They just can't seem to get their head wrapped around that. But anyways,
It is an interesting note. There's some flexibility and experimentation still going on, but sort of the blue and the green, a little bit more intense than maybe the nice, elegant red that they use in the Netherlands and in Austin.
Yeah. And that brings us to our urban bikeway design guide from NACTO. We talked about that earlier. And yes, now we're super excited to have the most recent edition of this out as well.
Yeah, so this was really, maybe a watershed moment for the industry, was the release of the Urban Bikeway Design Guide as a national level guidance by a growing but respected organization that could help tell people what was happening in the most bicycle-friendly cities in the US, that could help give them an example to follow, to be inspired by, and to copy in a way. And so this bike guide, I had mentioned this kind of in my transition into urban planning and my role at Alta Planning Design as an intern. I got to work on this project, which really formed my career in so many ways, both supporting the authorship, the narrative, some of the research behind the scenes, but also in the visuals. So I mentioned I was an animator and an artist, and so I did all the drawings in the NACTO Urban Bikeway Design Guide, illustrating all of these innovative bicycle facilities. And, in the process of doing that, really learned so much. So it wasn't just like I'm writing down a bike lane, it's going to be this big, but I was actually kind of building them in these virtual environments for these illustration purposes. And so it was like I got very close to street design, to bikeway design. The image up here now shows protected bike lanes. There's, retrofit design with paint and parked cars. And at the time, these same challenges that we had in the 1960s with protected bike lanes still persisted today. People were concerned about visibility. They were concerned about right hook risk. They were concerned about safety at intersections. And the NACTO bike guide did have some solutions at intersections, but it didn't have the Dutch design. So the protected intersection didn't come until years later as a viable design that we could be embracing. But what we did offer up were things like mixing zones. So there's different solutions to these problems, and the mixing zone was embraced as one that I think engineers could understand, they could see, and it could help get you to yes. get you to a point where you could say yes to these protected lanes that for the last 30 years had been rejected outright. And so, I think it's important to, where were we in this industry? We were just trying to convince people that this was going to be okay. And having something like a mixing zone, which does actually resolve right hook conflicts in a way, it's stressful, but it's safe. And so also, very much so inspired by maybe by the Danes and the work that they were doing. If you go to Copenhagen, you can kind of squint your eyes. It looks a little bit like an American city in some ways when you look at the streets. And they used mixing zones pretty comprehensively. And so I think we saw that. We saw that as a solution and embraced that in this guide as one potential answer to the problem.
Yeah, and that you're very you're correct there. You're quite you're spot on in terms of the differences and the challenges between the Danes and the Dutch. And yeah, when you're in Copenhagen, you squint your eyes and you're like, this seems very North American in context, and that's also some of the things that they're challenged with and they're working on, is to try to make it enhance it and make it a little bit safer and stop prioritizing the motor vehicles as much as they are, which is kind of what is happening when we see these mixing zones and these these lanes that are trying to prioritize the movement of cars and making those permissive sort of right lanes, right turns. And so I think we've learned a lot since then, and I will even say this. I think that some of the work that we're going to be profiling here in just a little bit that you put together really helped that, because the videos that you put together and the work that you started to put together of explaining what a protected intersection was and how it works was instrumental, I think, to really helping North America get their head wrapped around the fact that, we don't have to do it this way. Which is cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it was a little bit like the NACTO guide. I think they would tell you that, one of the things they were doing at the time was trying to say yes to the things that people were already doing. So if it wasn't already being done in the US, it wasn't being included in the guide. So there was a little bit of this test where if it was too far, it was too innovative or like not embraced in the US, we weren't going to do it, because we always wanted to be able to point to American cities that were making this happen. And so when it came to the Dutch protected intersection design, that had yet to happen. And so we didn't have anywhere to point to. We didn't have those examples on the ground. And so it was like, it wasn't eligible really to be included at the time. Yeah.
I want to pause on this memorandum here, because it's also, we see the introduction of the bike box here, and this mixing zone area and allowing the right turn. You've included this memorandum. It's too small to actually read the print on it, but what did you want to say about this?
Well, just that, the NACTO guide introduced ideas that were considered new. Cities like Portland were doing this. Cities like New York City were doing this, San Francisco, but other cities weren't. And they would often struggle to, even though it was in the NACTO guide, they would still struggle to do it because it wasn't adopted by FHWA as a part of their Bikeway design guide or the MUTCD or other design guides. But along the way, just a few years later, FHWA started to take the work that the cities were doing through that experimentation process and start to adopt them. So these are called interim approvals. So these are approvals from FHWA that says, yes, you can do bike boxes. Yes, you can do colored bike lanes. And that's where they settled on green. Yes, you can do signalized intersections with bike signals. And this starts to formalize these in even more kind of legitimized fashion through FHWA. And, maybe there's issues to be taken about what they did formalize in each of these cases, but it is a part of that process, going from these ideas that were being tested, documentation and things like the NACTO guide, formalization by FHWA, with now all of these things are folded into the new MUTCD based off this work. So just that sort of pipeline from experimentation to formal adoption along the way is what I wanted to kind of communicate, that the NACTO guide was actually highly effective at making some of that happen.
And just, for folks who can't read this date on here, this is 2016 that we're talking about. So we're looking at about 9 years ago. So it puts that into context. Ah, look at this. This is starting to look Dutch-like, except for we're in green.
Yes, yeah. So this is a little bit like that. This came out a couple years after the NACTO bike guide came out. And this is a still from a video from a blogger, BicycleDutch, who has been promoting Dutch design for years on the internet through his posts, through his blogs. And when the bike guide came out, he's like, finally, the Americans are trying to figure this out. They're trying to do next generation bikeway design, but they're failing. And they kind of like, he had kind of a critical voice to the work that we were presenting. And in particular, when it came to intersections, because we did not include the Dutch intersection design. So this is, he's describing what he called Dutch junctions. And he takes some graphics from the NACTO guide. And remember, I made these graphics. So like he's loading this thing on the screen. He's telling us how it's wrong. And I'm taking it a little bit personal. But this video did get a lot of attention when it came out, saying, hey, the Americans are doing a good job, but they need to do better. And here is this design, this Dutch junction, and figure it out, guys. And so we did get a lot of attention. I looked at it and I was very skeptical, frankly, when I first saw this. I was like, I don't know how this is going to fit in our streets, and is there really enough room? And how, as a bicyclist, would I want to go through this like circuitous path that he's kind of illustrating here? And so I had a lot of skepticism, but I was also curious, and he got my imagination started, and as well as many others, about, is there more we can do at these protected bike lanes so that they can perform better, be safer, be more comfortable?
Yeah, yeah. And Mark is a dear friend of mine and has been on the channel multiple times. And I've had a chance to film with him in his hometown as well. So it's good stuff. And I remember that original video that he put together on this. And now at this time, in this era of when you were putting this stuff together, and you had mentioned you were kind of like, oh, I wonder, the circuitous route around. Had you visited the Netherlands at that point? Had you spent any time there riding yet?
I had not. So I was sort of being introduced to some of these differences in the Netherlands that I had not been familiar with. And that because we weren't doing it in the US, it wasn't being incorporated into the NACTO guide. And so I had to do a little more digging to kind of get to the root of his concepts.
Yeah. Here's Mark.
And this is the latest advice for a cycle lane with a right turning lane. The problem with this design is the extremely bad angle of crossing. A driver has to look over his right shoulder to see if there's
I love the sort of Dutch brutal honesty that he just hits the gate saying, great guys, but look at this design, let's do better.
Yeah. And that's very much his style and the way that he does it. And it's also very Dutch, as you know, working for a Dutch firm now. The Dutch have are famous for being like brutally honest and upfront and almost brusque about how they deliver things. So yeah, that's pretty fun. Now this is a protected intersection video from 2014. Is this one yours?
This one's mine. So yeah. So
okay.
I after that video came out, I spent, I was working on projects, continuing to do design guidance work for cities as part of bike planning projects while I was working at Alta Planning and Design. And I did a lot of doodling at the time. I was like drawing these out, like how can this work? I've got some challenges that I see with what Mark did, but what can we do to solve them? And it kind of emerged into this concept for protected intersections. So yeah, this video was really my way of trying to communicate these ideas in a broader way. And I agreed with them. We were doing things we weren't doing enough. I start out really critical in some ways of things like mixing zones. I got in a little bit of heat for being too critical in some ways, but I'm trying to set this up to say we need to do better and we need to go beyond some of these tools that we already have.
Yeah. It's funny too, how thin-skinned some of these engineers and designers are about this stuff. It's like, guys, it's not a personal attack, honest. But
we
so
all just want to do better, right? We always want
Yeah.
to get where we need to go.
Yeah. And I love this too. I mean, circa 2014, that was when we actually made the move from Hawaii to here in Austin, Texas. By that time, Austin had already had an ongoing relationship with the Dutch Cycling Embassy. And so some of the first protected bike lanes and terracotta red colored were already in place. So when we arrived in 2014 in Austin, we already had the beginnings of our first protected bike lanes. And then very soon after that, we had our first protected intersections. But that's what you're describing here now, and you're walking through this. Let's turn the volume up just to get a little of your narration.
There are four main elements to protected intersection designs: a corner refuge island, a forward stop bar for bicyclists, a setback bike and pedestrian crossing, and bicycle-friendly signal phasing. The corner refuge island is the key element that makes these intersections function. This island brings the protective barrier from the bike lane far into the intersection. Think of it like a curb extension for bicyclists. The island physically separates bicyclists as they make right turns and provides a secure refuge for those waiting at a red signal protected.
I'm going to press pause here for just a second.
You loaded this up at the perfect time, because what the video did that I think so this video came out and it got very popular right away, and which was so great to watch. And it was like this new idea that people were hungry for, because at this point, this is 2014, the NACTO bike guide had been out for a few years. Cities were building protected bike lanes, and they were finally starting to build networks of protected bike lanes. And so not only were there, the challenges of what do you do at the intersection, but the challenges of how do you circulate through intersections to connect from one protected bike lane to another. And then the people were getting hungry for some solutions that didn't feel like you were just sitting out in the middle of the intersection in a turn box, which is sort of the solution that they had at the time. And so I think it was the right time for cities who were trying to solve this very problem of how do we circulate as we build out a network, but they just didn't have the language. And so what I did in this video, not only calling it protected intersections, this was actually the first time that name had really come out in a big way, talking about Dutch style intersections. And that name itself is compelling and easy to grab onto in the era of protected bike lanes. But then within the video, I'm articulating the different elements that help you build it and put it in the language that American engineers can understand, because they understand median islands and refuge islands and stop bars and waiting areas. Like they just couldn't put it all together. And in some ways, even in the Netherlands, they didn't quite have a name for it. It was just sort of the natural product of what happens when you have these wide separated protected bike lanes starting to intersect. But we needed to deconstruct it and reconstruct it for our engineers. And so it gave them a language, it gave them terminology, and it gave them kind of these foundations to understand what they were even looking at. So it worked so well that I think as soon as it came out, people were grabbing this video and forwarding it to their city councils or their planners or whatever, saying, we need these in our community. How do we do this? Let's build this. And sort of just came out and surprised people with how much attention it got. Surprised me in some ways with how much attention it got.
Yeah. If you were to recreate this video now, what would you change about the design, graphic-wise?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think,
I have some immediate things that pop into mind that Leonard would probably also say.
I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I think, what I was really recognized in this and in terms of the design that I portrayed here is just taking advantage of kind of the extra width that these parking protected bike lanes had. That was really what helped me personally, realize this could work, and above and beyond maybe the original BicycleDutch Junction video of how do we make this work in a way that is really comfortable for me as a bicyclist and prioritizes where I want to be and where I want to go, and taking advantage of that extra width worked in the design. But yeah, I'm curious your thoughts. What would you like to see in a revised version of this here 10 years later, if we were rethinking it or redoing it?
Well, I mean, just also kind of like taking into context too what we've observed in the Netherlands in terms of their design and how they're adapting some of their design. They're like starting to realize that their little refuge islands that they're creating there, they're starting to sculpt them out, and like because they need more waiting area for the people on bikes, and so they're also making sure that the angle, the turning angle, the radius that the cars have is much more abrupt and less of a sweeping turn that where cars can, the drivers are able to do that kind of at speed, and then they're perpendicular to. So really kind of tightening up some of those angles. And so those are the two things that immediately kind of like, ooh, it's close. It's almost Dutch scale, but then when you look at it from above, you're like, oh wow, look at this, and they're like doing these sorts of things. And so that's one of the things that I love about the Dutch approach to how they're building their streets, is that they're always evaluating, they're always tinkering with it. It's like this concept in business called continuous improvement, and they're always working on evaluating and tweaking and making it even better, including looking at, oh, we've got a problem of so many people are queuing in this area. How can we create more space for them to queue and get through the intersection quicker? So I just love that spirit of continuous improvement.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. We are, modern guidance does get into tightening the radius, using things like truck aprons. Here we love our big vehicles, and we, try to figure out how do the engineers solve for this. So there have been some innovations in the guidance since this video has come out. And
that's, you just said something. You just said something
idea.
there. Clarify that. What do you mean we love our big vehicles?
Oh yeah, well, maybe not all of us, but there is a challenge here trying to adapt this type of infrastructure into a U.S. context, and it's partly political, partly physical, and really in the end, it does take engineers sort of saying yes to this. So some of this is these baby steps of how do we hold our own against the engineers? How do we bring solutions to the table, get them to say yes, and say, oh, in the end, it's not too bad. Let's do this anyways.
Yeah. We've got this image here, which makes me chuckle a little bit, but I'll let you introduce it to the audience here.
Yeah, this is just the still of kind of those different elements that I outlined in the video, how you build a protected intersection. And again, like by giving people names to refer to, I think it really gave advocates, designers, planners, tools to talk to the engineers, and engineers tools to understand, so they could think about what they were building and why and what it would take. So it was again, this sort of like just giving people the words did so much to help reveal to them that something different was possible.
Yeah. I chuckle too when I see the bicycle-friendly signal phasing, and the other thing that pops up, especially when the Dutch are watching some of the videos that I'm producing from here in North America, and they're just like, "What is it with these signals that are across the intersection? Why don't you have the bicycle signals on the near side?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's one of the great things." Now in Portland, you guys have one of the first. I think I had seen from Peter Kuntz post that you have one of the first near side bike signals that has,
we've got many now
installed.
Actually all over the city.
Fantastic.
These near side bike signals, and I think inspired by the Dutch kind of near side signal. It's good as a bicyclist. You got the signal that's for you. But I think actually one of the best things that they do is it's all the signals are on the near side. And I've got an image I supplied a little bit later of a protected intersection that Mobycon designed. That's maybe the most Dutch protected intersection in North America. And it does, and we'll talk maybe more about that, but it does move all of the signals to the near side, not just the bike signals. So kind of interesting.
That's the one in Canmore, right?
That's the one in Canmore. Yeah, you probably maybe heard about it with talking. Yeah,
I've profiled it on the channel. I can't remember who I profiled it with. It might have been Leonard, or it might have been somebody else who was involved in that project. But this is really interesting. This is from UCLA in 1972.
Yeah, we're going back to the 70s.
We were looking at this way back then. We were
going back to
this.
the 70s. Yeah, it's pretty wild. So in the same way that we were experimenting with protected bike lanes in California and the UC Davis area, they were also thinking about this problem of, okay, how do we do this? Now, this is a diagram that's on the screen from a 1972 design guidelines that this had never been built in the US. I think they reference it as like a German design. So these types of ideas were being pursued in Europe. But when you look at it today, you're like, that's a protected intersection. And it's wild because I had not seen this before doing my work. This sort of emerged a little bit later as we continued to dig into it. I'm like, and it was just so wild seeing these ideas that we were thinking were so new, so innovative, and instead, actually, no, we've thought about this before. People have known about this for a while, and here's this diagram from 50 years earlier where we are finally now seeing it.
Yeah. And again, the vehicular cyclist movement killed it pretty effectively.
So the video had just come out and people were excited, and there was sort of an arms race to try to build these things. Cities were like, how do we do this? Who wants to be the first? Who can get their protected intersections and their protected bike lanes first? And this is a pop-up protected intersection from 2015. So just that within the year, someone reached out to me from Minneapolis in their efforts to try to promote bicycling. Minneapolis is a great biking city here in the States. And we built one. We built kind of a mock-up, full-size protected intersection during an open streets event in 2015 to demonstrate that it can fit. You can do this. We can make this happen. So this was a parking protected bike lane configuration with the corner islands and the refuge islands. And it's made out of, bits and pieces of stuff we could assemble for the one day only demonstration. But it was also very effective in showing how this can work. How do you circulate through this thing? How would it protect you in the interaction with cars potentially? And just proving that it can fit into a space where I think people look at that and they're like, how does this even fit? We've got the space. We can do this. We can make it happen. So it helped demonstrate that was possible.
What's really, really interesting too is in the middle of this image that's on screen here, and again for the listening only audience, this is a pop-up demonstration project, a tactical urbanism type demonstration project of a protected intersection. But in the middle of the screen and off to the far left, you'll see that there's a car sort of queued up, and you'll see some planter protection that's also delineating a planter protected bikeway. And what was really funny is I remember those exact planters and that exact setup from the previous year, because I was actually filming the Open Streets event in Minneapolis, and they had a pop-up protected bike lane. And so they were collecting data. They were showing people at the Open Streets event what a protected bike lane was with a planter protection. And so that image just kind of like they took it to the next level. The previous year they were doing getting feedback from people using a protected bike lane. The next year, obviously, they took a next level up of the protected bike lane into a protected intersection. And this is one of the great things that I think has emerged over the last decade is that acceptance of doing these sort of tactical urbanism, these pop-up sorts of installations to try to help people understand what this is all about, because it's so much better to feel it and experience it than looking at a diagram like this on page. And so when people are presented at open houses with the fancy diagrams and scrolls that the designers put together and everything, it's like, yeah, I still don't get it. What's it feel like? This helps people understand what it feels like.
Yeah, and it was interesting because it was sort of in some ways, the first time I really got to see this in the U.S. as like a functional thing as well. As like, at this point, it had been diagrams, it had been conceptual, and here we are actually building it. And it's kind of funny because what we used to build these islands, these sort of fake concrete islands, was like 2-inch thick foam. Sort of like construction foam. I have such a fondness. It's probably a whole different conversation, but I have such a fondness for the low height curbs that they use in the Netherlands that are much more bicycle friendly. And when they build these protected intersections in the U.S., one of my biggest criticisms is that everyone goes to the full standard 6-inch curb, and a 6-inch curb it's not a bicycle friendly curb. It eats into your operating space. It's too beefy. It collects debris. These like more elegant low height curbs. It's funny, this pop-up the first one, in some ways, that little detail, that's one thing I wish I could see in these more permanent constructions that we have yet to see. But so the race was on. How do we build these? We did this pop-up, which was so wonderful. But the first kind of formal protected intersection in the U.S. came to Davis, California, which feels appropriate given its connection to the history. And this is a project that Mobycon had worked on with Fair and Peers to design and incorporate this latest intersection design. They had a connection of bike lanes to some shared use paths, and they were using it as a way to try to formalize that circulation and create a comfortable condition for people walking and biking.
Yeah. And then our next
the second protected,
here.
Maybe a month later, the second protection intersection got built in Salt Lake City, which is one that I got to be participating on. I helped design this one. And so it was this sort of this cascade of protected intersection implementations that started to happen all across the country. So starting in Davis, here we are in Salt Lake City, who, famously known for their super wide streets. So as a part of these roadway reconfigurations to do road diets, to put in protected bike lanes, there is the space to try to build out these protected intersections. And these first ones were really critical for understanding how they work. Can we build them? What do they look like? And really helped set the tone for a lot of the protected intersections to come.
Yeah. And this innovation, very soon after this being built, the Congress for the New Urbanism had their meeting there in Salt Lake City. I was able to ride on it, look at it, profile it, come back and interview John Larson on the podcast when it was audio only. I need to get John back on. Actually, I need to get back to Salt Lake City to look at some of the stuff that has happened in the interim in the years since. But yeah, it was wonderful to see. And we start to see some other designs. This is actually in the Mueller community here in Austin, Texas. And we believe that this is the first protected intersection in the state of Texas. And this is an interesting design because this is the intersection of Zach Scott and Tilly. And the construction that you see in the upper image, the lower right corner, is the corner of Tilly and Zach Scott where the Marshall Middle School is. And so now this is like, in fact, in the lower photo, you can see, some of the riders going through the protected intersection here, and you can see some of the homes being built in the distance. Now, this is the school is done. It's been open for 2 years, and we're at about 95% build out of the community here at Mueller, spelled Mueller. Half people pronounce it Miller, half the people pronounce it Mueller. And it used to be our airport. And so this was a complete redo, a greenfield development of what used to be the runways at our municipal airport, our main airport. And it's been fabulous to see this mature and document this maturing over the last decade. And I can tell you that these protected bikeways throughout the community and the protected intersections make a huge amount of difference to the number of families and kids that are riding on a daily basis there.
Yeah, this is, maybe a great example of, planning done right in the U.S. This whole new development area that clearly had been thought through with streets and trail systems that interconnect. And here at this intersection, this opportunity to have this circulation in that low stress protected intersection fashion. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring this example from Austin to the table is because while all this was happening, the NACTO guide's out, the Dutch Junction video's out, I'm putting out these ideas about protected intersections. Nathan Wilkes in the city of Austin, Texas, was doing the exact same thing. And he was really leading kind of quietly in Austin on doing this type of low stress design, high quality design, protected intersection, Dutch style design. So, he was exploring these exact same ideas, and we were kind of doing it in parallel. And so it's kind of one of those examples of we're all thinking in the same way. We're all trying to get to the same place. And also, yeah, great example. I love the attention to detail here on this intersection. And yeah, when I went to go visit it, which I took this photo at the bottom, riding around with some friends. Yeah, the neighborhood had really yet to be built. So it was sort of this. The streets didn't all connect. The circulation wasn't necessarily complete, but now I imagine that it's well used and well loved. So just a great example of like these ideas coming to fruition over time. But I just want to give good credit to Nathan Wilkes and all the great work being done in Austin to really make their city a safe and comfortable place to ride bikes.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nathan, of course, has benefited from the fact that, again, over a decade ago, the city was able to establish that relationship with the Dutch Cycling Embassy, and there was lots of information exchange. Back in 2012, they had their Think Bike workshop, the very first Think Bike workshop with the Dutch Cycling Embassy, and that really helped pave the way, pardon the pun, for being able to get these Dutch-inspired designs out on the ground here in Austin, Texas. And you don't really see it in this particular image, but we'll see it in other images, I think, is that we also adopted the using of, as I mentioned earlier, the terracotta pigment in some of the infrastructure when they're pouring concrete. Oh, and that brings us to protected intersections. And we see the don't give up at the intersection, which is kind of one of the NACTO approaches of understanding what was happening. Is we started to adopt the green lane program and the protected bikeways, and then we would get to the intersection and just sort of give up.
Yeah, and just like the story of these other bike lane elements, the experimentation happens on the ground, the guidelines start to formalize it, and it becomes this formal tool that can be used. Protected intersections, which was not in the original NACTO guide, went through that same process. So the idea comes out, the cities are building these and learning from them, and then the formal guidance gets adopted. So in the kind of years after the protected intersection video came out and the cities started building these intersections, then these organizations started formally embracing them as well. So both NACTO and FHWA recognized protected intersections as a new tool in the toolbox and started to provide guidance for cities to start to implement these. And so you start to see kind of a little more of that formalization of these tools into the regulations and the guides that are available for cities all around the country.
Now we're seeing some of the red pigment.
Yeah. So, so since then, they're now formal tools. We are 10 years later since these ideas came out. And I wanted to highlight this intersection as a great example of maybe one of the more Dutch versions of a protected intersection. It's got the terracotta color throughout the pathway, separating pedestrians and bicyclists. It has near side signals. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance. I wasn't on the team at Mobycon when they were designing this intersection, but they did, of course, they did everything right, bringing all of the Dutch tools to the table. The team working in Canmore, Alberta, Canada, in the city was embracing of these ideas and wanted to try to do things differently. So this really pulls all the tools together, including, you'd mentioned, the near side signal. And so these traffic signals, instead of being across the street, as we're all used to, they're on your side of the street where you stop. And we do that now. You mentioned in Portland, we have that a lot for bike signals. It is a nice, handy feature to have your signal right there. It's for you. It's close to you. But actually, I think bringing all the signals to our side of the street is a great innovation that, maybe we can think about how we can do here in America. In particular, I think it does a really good job of keeping people from running red lights and discouraging encroachment and all sorts of, behavioral things we want to be controlling at these intersections.
This particular image here on screen really highlights one of the things that I love most about the Dutch design of their bikeway networks, and that's the continuous level of the bikeway design. We see this being implemented in a handful of cities in North America. The one that I've documented in the past is more Danish inspired, but still in using this, and that's in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where they are, especially along Western Avenue and a few of their other installations, they've gone out of their way to prove that you can actually have continuous level of your sidewalks and of your bikeways, and in their case, they proved that they could retrofit it and put it in, and the world wouldn't stop spinning. So incredibly important. From your perspective and the work that you're doing, add anything that I'm missing about this.
Yeah, a lot of what we've been talking about are these protected intersections as a solution for these major streets. How do we make these major streets safe and comfortable? And as I kind of was thinking, okay, well, what's next? What comes after? What's this next realm of innovation? What are we looking to the Dutch for in terms of what they're doing that we can bring here into the States? And this world of, continuous cycle track and sidewalk crossings, and is, I think, the most underappreciated design detail we could be bringing into our streets. And even if it's not even for bikeways, even just main streets, prioritizing pedestrians, this idea that your sidewalk and your bike lane should remain raised and continuous through intersection crossings of side streets. I think that's a really powerful way of prioritizing bicycling and walking. I think that can really create an experience where you feel uninterrupted, because literally the path is uninterrupted, and really actually building a design that reinforces the traffic laws as they are. When you're a driver turning onto a side street, or you're exiting a neighborhood and going onto a main street, you are supposed to yield to people walking and biking along the main line. But the way we design our streets, typically, it doesn't happen. It's, we clearly, the sidewalk ramps down, the bike lane breaks, the priority, even though legally is for people walking and biking through, the design seems to say otherwise. And so what these continuous crossings do is they make the design match the law. And they do it in such an elegant way. So when this photo that's on the screen, you look at it and you're like, oh, that's just a protected bike lane. That's an intersection. And it's hard to even notice in some ways because the sidewalk and the bike lane are so uninterrupted. And so I think that this is an area that I would love to see more of. How do we create that continuous experience end to end? There's a lot of criticism of protected bike lanes on areas with frequent intersections. Here in Portland, we have relatively short blocks, so we often have intersections. And so what can we do? We can do something like this, where the experience as a bicyclist or a pedestrian feels uninterrupted, and we're really designing with their user priority in mind. So to me, this is a great tool, a great treatment. We're seeing a lot more in Canada, but I really hope to see more of this getting embraced here in America, in the US.
And I'd like to emphasize that this is really what I mean by creating all ages and abilities design standards. Just imagine somebody in an adaptive cycle or a wheelchair. I mean, not having to go up and down off of these curb cuts at each and every one of these minor intersections and more less prioritized cross streets, et cetera. It's like having that continuous level is much more dignified for those individuals with mobility challenges.
And it was a video of one of these in action in Canada, and you can kind of see the video. There's an interaction between this driver and this bicyclist, and the driver is waiting. And I think we might not expect to see that kind of behavior in the way we would typically design a driveway, design an intersection.
Yeah. So one of my other favorite topics that I've chatted with Leonard about multiple times are the Dutch designs of the Dutch roundabouts and the cycle tracks and things of that nature. I don't know why you've included this photo, so I'm going to let you describe what we're looking at.
Yeah, and I know you've talked with Leonard a little bit about this topic. It comes up every once in a while, but really toward that that idea of like what's next. And I think Dutch roundabouts have been what's next for a while now in terms of how do we incorporate good design here in the States. But the way they do roundabouts really is very different from how we do it here in the States, and the way we've designed our roundabouts. I think my Dutch colleagues describe the American roundabouts as slingshot roundabouts, where you enter in, I think design guidelines wants you to enter in slowly, right? You're doing those interactions with other cars, but then they kind of whip you around and launch you out the other side. And unfortunately, that place where they launch you out the other side, because they want the exits to be fast, that's where people are walking and biking and crossing the street. And so the way we design our roundabouts has not been that great for people walking and biking. And there is another way. And I think that I'd love to see more cities embracing Dutch style geometry and approaches to roundabout design, so that we can try to bring it back as a tool that's not just good for safety for people driving, but good for the safety and access of everybody. And so I think this is a room for growth we have here in the States, is to rethink our roundabouts, in particular in more compact designs for urban areas. So I'd love to see some of these also emerge here in this sort of the next 10 years of the building of our safe, connected bike systems here in the States.
Yeah, yeah. And before any of our North American roundabout designers start freaking out and start putting things in the comments here to the video, yes, we get it. The roundabout intersection designs that the North America has been employing are much safer than the previous iteration of intersection design. So we're not saying that. We're just saying that being able to tighten up some of these angles and really reinforce slower design speed, and through the articulation of the intersection of the roundabout, and really fine-tuning it, using that Dutch lens of fine-tuning it, really makes it so much safer for people walking and biking, or in wheelchairs trying to cross and navigate through that intersection. Because the way we've been doing it in North America, it's really car infrastructure, and it's very effective car infrastructure, and it does enhance safety, but only if you're in an automobile. So, and again, we're seeing this playing out in communities like in Carmel, Indiana, where they have the largest number of installed North American style roundabouts and multi-lane roundabouts. And many of them, they're realizing, are not very comfortable for people walking and biking in that area. So yeah, we're a hard lesson learned. A good opportunity for the future. Good stuff.
Yeah, I really do. I really think there's real opportunity there. Similar to the protected intersections, as these cities are building out their bikeway network, they're going to be faced with how do we navigate these roundabouts, and there are ways to do it. And I think that the real message is that you can build these here in the States. And I know that some cities are trying, and we're seeing more bike lanes, sort of protected bike lanes integrated into roundabouts. It's still kind of rare, but there's a few around the country today. And I think that as we start doing more of those, it's going to be even more important to get the rest of the details of the roundabout right. So it's not just about providing a bike path around the roundabout, but you have to make sure that those interactions at the crossings are safe and that you're building it to be safe for everybody.
Yeah. Good stuff. I'm going to pull up the website once again. Again, Mobycon is who you are now working with, and you guys are doing some amazing stuff all around the globe. Certainly do appreciate you joining me here today. Is there anything that we didn't yet have a chance to discuss that you want to make sure to leave the audience with?
I guess it's more the overall theme of a lot of our conversation, that this world of innovation is still ongoing. There's more to learn from our colleagues all around the world, and that we can keep innovating in the US, and we can keep going beyond the guidelines. We finally have the new generation of guidelines from FHWA, from NACTO, but there's more to learn, and there's more to keep doing and keep doing better. So I'm really excited to be a part of a team that's bringing that energy and that vision of doing more and doing better and continuing to do different here into the States, and really look forward to what the next 10 years of innovation have to bring us here in the US and Canada.
Yeah. Good stuff. Nick, this has been so much fun. It's been a long time coming. I'm so sorry that it took us so long to make this happen, but thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast. This has been such a joy and pleasure.
And thank you so much for the chance to share. I really enjoyed the conversation and look forward to more.
Hey, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Nick Falbo. And if you did, please, hey, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and share it with a friend. And if you haven't done so already, be honored to have you subscribe to the channel. Just click on the subscription button down below and be sure to ring that notifications bell. And again, if you're enjoying this content here in the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Super easy to do. Just click on the join button down below here on YouTube, as well as making a contribution to the nonprofit or becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do all of that by navigating over to activetowns.org. Click on the support tab at the top of the page. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, this is John signing off by wishing you much activity, health, and happiness. Cheers. And again, just want to send a huge thank you to all my Active Towns ambassadors supporting the channel financially via YouTube memberships, YouTube super thanks, as well as making contributions to the nonprofit and joining my Patreon. Every little bit adds up and is very much appreciated. Thank you all so much.